Well, we're up to episode 37 of Commentator's Corner, and I've got another great guest to join us on the show. And I've known this man for quite a time. We keep in touch on a regular basis. He only lives about 40 minutes from me down in the outskirts of Chelmsford. A very warm welcome, Sam Hall. How are you, buddy?
Hello, yes, I'm not bad at all, and I'm definitely not coughing all over the place. So I will just explain, we have just had to restart the recording because I was an idiot and went through my wrong microphone. So Alex was interrupted by my asthmatic coughing. It's nothing else, honest.
Exactly. So, Sam, one of the things I like my guests to do is to basically give a quick introduction about who you are, what you do, and how long you've been in motorsport for. So take it away, the floor's yours.
So yeah, I'm Sam Hall. I'm currently an online editor for Autosport and motorsport.com. I have previously worked for Auto Week in the United States. I worked for GP Fans for 3 years covering Formula One. And I've been in motorsport. This is going to make me seem older than I feel. I started with Auto Week in 2016, but prior to that, I think I've been actually working in motorsport since about 2011, 2012.
Mm-hmm.
So over a decade of service now, which is a scary thought.
Which also includes a stint at Downforce Radio, where you can also listen to this podcast on as well. So a warm welcome to our viewers, not just on YouTube, because obviously this is now part of YouTube podcasts. We also have the show broadcasting on audio, and you can play it whenever you like, completely free to either listen to or download, depending on your subscription level when it comes to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and of course on Downforce Radio. Well, Sam, we've known each other for, I think, the best part of close to a decade anyway. But journalism is a very, very interesting facet. It's a very, very demanding role within motorsport, irrespective of whether you're on the ground in a paddock, like, say, you having worked with Auto Week and with GP Fans. There were times when you were in the Formula One paddock. Just explain to the folks at home what a stereotypical day, I wouldn't say typical day, on, like, say, a Formula One weekend, because we both know that no 2 days on a race weekend are the same. Just give the folks at home a little bit of a flavour of what happens from your perspective when you are you're in the paddock and you're working in the media centre over the course of a weekend.
So I will I'll use America last year, Austin last year, as an example, because that was kind of on the extreme for length of days. So I would leave my accommodation, which is not a 5-star luxury hotel as you may expect. I was actually in a Silver Stream or Silver Line, whatever they're called, caravan. I was staying in one of those, so I had to drive to the track at about 7 in the morning to avoid any traffic, and then straight into the paddock, straight into the media center, bump into people as you're walking through the paddock, talk to people, get as much information as you can, because, to be honest, you're always working. You never stop working. As soon as you're in the paddock, you are taking in that information and using that as color to pass on to your readers, listeners, whatever it might be that you're doing that day. So you get, obviously, the media sessions that are planned. You have the on-track stuff, and those are the easy bits. Those are the bits that sort of the big bits that you expect to be the hard things, but they're not. They're the easy bits, because that's when you are just doing your job. I find it easiest to talk to drivers and team bosses, whoever it might be, as if they're just a friend, as if sort of they are on the same level as me, because the way I see it, when I'm in the paddock, they are there to do a job. and I am there to do a job. So we are all working professionals in the paddock. No one is above the other person. Yes, if I'm chatting to Lewis Hamilton, he may have he does have a hell of a lot more money than I do. So in stature and in wealth, he is far more important than I am. But in that paddock at that time, we are both there to do a job. So we are equals. And generally, people seem to be like that in the paddock. Yes, you'll have one or two that seem to think that they're above each other, both on the journalistic side, maybe, and also on the not really on the driving side, but definitely on the team's side. There are a couple. So yeah, you just never stop. This is the thing I need to get across, because trying to get a lunch break, trying to get a meal break, or time to just go and grab a quick drink. Last year, when I was with GP Fans in that paddock, there was two of us working. So there was one person, you and Gail, who you will be aware of as well, Alex. He was back at home working European hours, and I was obviously working American time. So the reason I mentioned the time that I left my caravan each morning, I got back to there each night at just gone midnight. So I would be there for sort of 5 maybe hours if I was lucky. So I really feel for the people that have been in Vegas and in Abu Dhabi, because they are going to have had a really horrible time getting used to these time differences and being able to work while pretty much never stopping. It's crazy. If you want to get into motorsport journalism, can't recommend it highly enough, but you need to be a certain breed of person to cope.
It's a very good way of putting it. I mean, Sam and I have worked together. We were in the paddock during the brand finale of W Series in its inaugural season, where we were seeing a great battle between Jamie Chadwick and Beitske Visser, which went down to the wire that weekend. It was a double header, of course. It was running with the stereotypical visit to Brands Hatch Grand Prix that DTM have done over the last few years. And the thing is that from my perspective, I mean, I started in going into paddocks in 2013, and that was all thanks to the checkered flag and Vince Pettit. I mean, I took on DTM, and I can sort of echo what Sam has said, because you're going in there, you might be someone who's established, you might be someone who's a newbie, but you are all putting in the same amount of effort. You're transcribing interviews, you're trying to create content for the website. I still remember 2016, I was at the Hockenheim series finale in Hockenheim, and I remember it was 2014 actually, my apologies, it was 2014. It was Marco Wittmann's first title in the DTM, and at that point for BMW they had a premium partner, which was Red Bull. So and this is how Sam very well put across, that you find out information, and it can be from people like, say, photographers who are friends within the paddock. You'll know a couple of photographers that you work with quite closely or have become good friends with. And one of them came in, Jerry Andre, actually, who's been in the Formula One paddock for a few years. I mean, especially doing quite a bit of work with Sebastian Vettel before he retired. And then Fernando moved over when we had all that hoo-ha in a silly season where we didn't know where Fernando was going, and then he dropped the bombshell one weekend, like literally the day after Seb went, I've now decided at the end of the season to retire from Formula One. Jerry came in with another guy, Andreas, who was doing a lot of work for Speed Week, the Austrian publication. And they said, you're not going to believe this, Wittmann's got a test in a Toro Rosso. And I went, come on. And we're all conversing in German. And I said, please don't. Is this a joke? Are you BSing us? They went, no, the press release is about to come out. So I contacted one of my friends over at BMW Motorsport and said, I've just heard, can you just let me know, is this going to be official very shortly? And I said, I've just heard about Wittmann and the test. Yes, it is confirmed. But we are going live with the press release in an hour. So it was my last weekend with the checkered flag, because I was moving on to touringcars.net the following season. And then I posted it on Richland F1. So Luke Smith, be warned, I am coming after you for an interview on Commentator's Corner as well. And then the first person to quote the tweet at that point was none other than the legend that is Mr. Will Buxton, which was, I have to say, pretty cool, because earlier on that year I'd been in the Formula One paddock, and there was also not only just Will, and this was at the time when he was, I think him and Jason Swells were still working for NBC Sports, if I remember correctly. 2014.
When would that be? I think
2014,
so.
yeah.
I was chatting to Jason not long ago about that, so yeah, I should know that one.
But yeah, I think we there were very early get-ups. You know, the first thing that you've got to do is make sure that you are not stuck in that traffic, because that stops your workflow. But also there's another side to the journalistic side of things, because with Autosport you're the news editor, but you're also covering other series. Like this weekend, as we're recording this, we've had the F2 finale in Abu Dhabi. Obviously there's been the F2 testing, there's been the young driver test in Formula One. You've also been in the British GT paddock this year. How is it going so far with Autosport and motorsport.com as the news editor? Because you're speaking to some of the big people that a lot of people know when it comes to F1 journalism, especially John Noble, who always seems to be, whenever there's an announcement made, he's always in the air. That seems to be the journalistic curse for John Noble, that he's always in the air and something breaks. How's it been there with working with the team so far?
It's been good. It's been different because I've come from working with a very small team of 3 of us to going into a bigger team where you still think there's not enough of you, but it's a far bigger team that we've got on offer. And as you say, so you're speaking to these people sort of on a daily basis that, not that I grew up reading necessarily, but that you sort of hold in high esteem, and you go, okay, I'm working with these guys now. It's almost, and when I joined, it was sort of, okay, it was that moment of I've made it now. Whereas sort of obviously worked in Formula One before, like say 3 solid years of GP fans, but it's just sort of a different level that you go up to, and there's chances for progression which I haven't had in my career before. It's always been sort of, you've come in here and this is where you shall stay. So yeah, I can't speak highly enough of the publication and the people. And we've got the Autosport Awards coming up this weekend on Sunday as we record. So that's going to be another new experience. Got to go and get my tux for that tomorrow as well. So see if the one that will fit the added girth of sitting in a chair all day.
But also, we have to look at the other side of the coin, family life. Now, Sam is married, has got 2 beautiful daughters. How is it when you're having to juggle being a news editor at Autosport and having a young family? I guess that must be pretty taxing at times, especially, like, say, if there's an emergency that crops up, not just with yourself, not just from your side of the family, but your wife, Emma, her side of the family. There are those times when you have to sort of prioritize the family over the journalistic endeavors. Am I right?
Yeah, and that wasn't always possible before. I'll go back to compare it with GP fans. That with the team of 3 of us, it was always where possible. So we had the ruling. Ian Parks, New York Times journalist as well. He was our editor in chief, and he always said family comes first. So if I had something like one of the kids' birthdays, that would come first. The one time that we couldn't manage that, ironically, was America last year, because he was away, so I had to go to America. It sounds like it is a first world problem, but it is very taxing on family life. With a bigger team, we are able to say, "Look, I've got this. I need this time," and it's never a problem. If there's an emergency, it's never a problem. But in your head, you just kind of go, I'm supposed to be working, I'm supposed to be doing this. So I don't like asking for time off. I don't like asking for help. To the point where I ended up putting myself in counselling last year, which is an entertaining thing to go through. But like I said earlier, you've got to be a special breed of person to take this on, and I don't want to scare people off, but you have to be aware of the tax that it will take on your family life. You can't. It's my sister's wedding's coming up next year, so I've long had that date in the diary and gone, I am not working then, and I'm not working the day after either because I plan on having a hangover. Um, so yeah, it's you've got to prioritize family, but it is very difficult. And once traveling gets added into the mix, that is the hardest bit because what people on your social media see is, oh, you're going to this place, you're going to that place. That must be wonderful. You're living the life. But what they don't see is sort of the things that you're missing or sacrificing at home. Without wanting to make myself sound like a martyr, there, it's good. They are good experiences, but they come at a cost.
I mean, especially like say having to go to Kota last year, you're having to deal with different time zones. You're having to deal with having to combat jet lag as well. I mean, especially when it's like 5 hours behind us. So like 7 o'clock in the morning
Mhm.
is midday here. So like from Eastern time, so UK time, be it GMT or British summer time, you have to take that into account. Is that the longest you've ever had? Is that the furthest away you've ever had to travel to be on site, or has there been anywhere a little bit further afield in terms of flight duration? Because I know for a fact that, like, say, Bahrain from London Heathrow is just under 7 hours each way. So as a combined 14 hours round trip. I think for
Mm.
Texas it was a lot longer for you, wasn't it?
I honestly can't remember what I know the trip was horrible coming back and I was very lucky, because I flew into Dallas and then on to Austin, but, which made it a bit longer, but was more cost effective. As you'd soon discover, everything has to be cost effective. Um, but there were thunderstorms on the way back, so, I got to Austin Airport about 5 hours early for my flight, just going, "If these thunderstorms hit, I need to already be in Dallas or I'm not getting home." Um, I don't know if it's longer. It probably was longer because of the way I did it, but Bahrain was a long one, and Dubai is about the same as that. It's about 8 hours. So yeah, I've done a couple of longer ones, but Australia is still one that I would quite like to tick off. As we may get to, my love of Australia and Australian motorsport.
Well, we will actually get to that right now because this man had, I think, one of the best interviews of his career with a certain, yeah, he's wearing the Aussie Rugger shirt as well, none other than the legend that is Mark Scaife. You got to interview him. I think it wasn't it Autosport 2018, if I remember correctly.
I
Autosport
think so,
Show
yeah.
2018 at the NEC, which I think, if I remember correctly, was my last appearance because I'd done it from 2012 for a multitude of years, and 2018 I felt, well, it's time to sort of knock that on the head. And yeah, you had the first interview with him, and you have a little trinket in your possession, don't you? That you asked for an autograph on it, and said interviewee kindly reciprocated, didn't he?
Yes, and he kindly also, bearing in mind he's kind of an encyclopedia of supercars. This is Mark Scaife that we're on about here, multiple champion and now commentator. And yeah, I have one of his Bathurst winning cars, a 1 to 43 model. I have many 1 to 43s, but I took that along on the off chance I'd bump into him, let alone interview. And yeah, he signed that. So now I'm after Craig Lowndes if possible, to complete the set on that. I am that kind of person. Fortunately, when I've met Jensen Button, I have not had my collection of cars on me, so that might take him a while to sign that lot.
Well, Australia is definitely on your bucket list because there's one particular race that this man wants to go to, and it is, of course, the Repco Bathurst 1000 that happens at the tail end of every Supercars season. Let's have a talk about actually this year because Gizzy is now moving over to NASCAR full-time for 2024. Brody Kostecki and Erebus took the respective titles this year, which I have to say, considering the fact there were so many doubters about Gen 3 with the Camaros and the Mustangs now being under a bit more of a parity situation, because for those that don't know, that with Supercars Australia, they've now gone to, it used to be Holden and Ford, it's now Ford versus Chevy. What's been your thoughts on how the new Gen 3 car has really sort of spiced things up? Because I've watched quite a few of the highlights over the course of the season. I have to give a shout out to Compo, Neil Crompton, and also the infamous man in the pit lane. For those people that don't know, Larko.
You got there in the end.
Yeah, I
You
got
were
there in the end.
stalling for time.
I was stalling because I was trying to remember, and I didn't want to get it wrong. So, Larko, you do a fantastic job as always. Lowndes is great on commentary as well. But of course, Neil Crompton having that, that illness scare, just I think it was 18 months ago, and he's come back and he's just as fiery and passionate as always whenever things get underway. But what have been your thoughts? What have been your take homes from 2023 with regards to Gen 3 and Supercars?
If you watch the highlights, they probably look pretty good, the racing. But having watched every lap of it as live, or if not actually live, the racing has left a lot to be desired. I think they're some of the best looking touring cars possibly ever. They're brilliant looking things now. But the racing has been pedestrian, I want to say. Especially Bathurst this year, it left a lot to be desired. And the ongoing parity battle between Ford and Chevrolet, the Chevrolets came out of the blocks brilliantly. The chassis seemed to suit everything. The aerodynamics suited everything. Ford have gradually made incremental gains, but I don't know whether the last parity change has gone too far, because Ford seem to be winning machines since then, and historically Adelaide hasn't been a Ford hunting ground, but it seemed to be this weekend or last weekend. So it needs work. They're going and doing wind tunnel testing to get these cars properly level, and then essentially they can draw a line under parity. And I think there might be swear jars for the word parity next year. But they're going over to America with one of each car to do wind tunnel testing and proper aerodynamic testing. So the engines have been run on the dyno to death, so they are as level as you can get for two different engines. I think what people need to remember now is that different cars are always going to be different and have different strengths. If you want a one make series, have a one make series, then you'll have full on parity. If you want to have different cars, you're going to have divergence at some point. That said, it was kind of obvious to everyone, seemingly except for those in charge of supercars for quite a long time this year, that the Chevrolets had, I don't want to say an unfair advantage because they had the better car. If they've designed the better car, that's not their problem. But yeah, the Chevrolets did have an advantage until this recent change. That I think it came in for the Gold Coast. Yeah, Gold Coast and Adelaide, because they were denied it for Bathurst.
I think also because it's an early genesis of the car that hopefully in the next couple of seasons we should see more relevance in terms of the the equalization. I'm not going to use the word, the P word. We'll stop using that word. It's like saying balance of performance in GT3, and that's already
Oh no, don't go there.
that's been a soft spot. That's been a soft spot for heart attacks for many people in the GT3 world. But I think, yeah, it's the first season. It was always going to be a trial and error phase of the Gen 3 cars. They look awesome. They sound great. I love the fact that the engines are pretty much as close to road spec. You know, they've been taken from the respective manufacturers, and the amount of work that's gone with the technical team at Supercars to try and get them as equalized as possible has been a mammoth task. I mean, it was always going to be a case that Gen 3, the drivers were going to have to work harder for those points, for those wins, for those podiums. And I think it's nice to see, like, Kostecki and Erebus now be at that stage where they've gone, you know, we've made the best of the situation. I mean, if anyone might remember when the Mustang came out, you know, when the Falcon, when the Falcon was competing against the Commodore VB, which effectively was a Holden badged insignia, for those wondering. As soon as they got rid of the Falcon, went into the Mustang was literally winning everything, and that's why Scotty McLaughlin, Mr. Jandal himself, is now going into IndyCar in another season, which I'm really, really glad to see. I think that was a case of a reverse of what we had this year with the Gen 3s, with Chevrolet Racing Australia coming in with the Camaro ZL1. And then, of course, the Mustang, which is a tried and true product. But then, of course, Ford Performance, Mark Holbrook and the team over in Dearborn in Michigan, they were a little bit on the back foot, I think, in terms of the car. But because of the Mustang being an icon, you can't not have that silhouette away from supercars. And I think hopefully Season 2 of Gen 3, Season 3 will see a further evolution of that equalization, and hopefully that'll be providing more bang for your buck racing. I mean, it's great that they've got less to play with, because for those wondering, it's a bit like, say, GT3s in that supercars wanted to bring costs down for teams in general, and they were like saying, I was seeing like front uprights on suspensions, and they were being custom built, and teams like Triple Eight, DJR Penske were spending so much money trying to optimize it, trying to make it as light but as strong as possible, and to give the drivers just so much tactile feel on slight nuances on setup. But that's very much changed. They don't have as much ABS or traction input as they used to. They can't set the cars up like they used to. So I'm really, really pleased that it's going in the right direction, but it needs another couple of years, I think, to really sort of hit that sweet spot. Wouldn't you agree, Sam?
Yeah, as with anything, it's you don't get results immediately. I mean, the best thing about these cars is they resisted the urge, much because the drivers pushed for it. They resisted the urge to go for flappy paddle gears. So they've still got the gears, then sequential. It's not a H pattern. They haven't had that for ages. But it's got sequential gears on the floor. You've got your clutch. So you actually see them, especially going around Bathurst. You get the cameras in the footwells, and you see the feet dancing across the pedals. It's a whole different skill. I think and we've seen Kevin Estre raced at Bathurst this year, and he's someone who he's no slouch at all. But he struggled to get to grips with these cars. They don't have much downforce, which is a good thing. As much as Shane Van Gisbergen, my words will come out. Shane Van Gisbergen complained about that because he liked the warm, fluffy towel of downforce that obviously helps you go quicker. So yeah, we'll find out in a couple of years. Never judge something on its first year, because it's all trial and error.
I think also when you look at the fact of how many drivers that have come into supercars over the years, I mean, just to name a few people that have actually rocked up to the Bathurst 1000, Simona Di Silvestro, she's come back and back again to supercars, especially when it's co-driving for enduros. You've had Jason Plato, you've had Andy Priya, you've had Matthias Ekstrom. I still remember Zandvoort 2013. and it was the penultimate round of the DTM season. Mike Rockenfeller won the title. Augusto Farfus won the race, but Matthias Ekstrom and Andy Prio were then flying directly to Australia after that weekend because they were in the Xbox Holden Commodore wildcard that weekend. And I said to Andy, I went, "You looking forward to Bathurst?" He said, "Yeah, it's going to be interesting teaming up with Eki, you know." And I still remember when JP actually had that big crash at one point. I think he was coming onto some traffic or something and got launched, and his Holden got rolled quite spectacularly, if I remember correctly, a few years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I miss having the international drivers because it used to be a rule that you had to have international drivers. And yes, I like that they're giving national drivers and Super 2 drivers more of a chance because otherwise, how do you get the progression? And you are seeing these drivers get into full-time seats afterwards. And you only have to look at Will Brown, Brock Feeney more recently, who's done a fantastic job this year. Um, Again, he's going to have a difficult time next year because essentially he's going to be leading the Triple Eight team in the absence of Van Gisbergen. Oddly, I've just named his teammate as well, Will Brown. So clearly Triple Eight on the mind there. But no, I mean, I think next year's going to be an exciting season. The pairings always look good because there's so little between the drivers. You haven't asked for a prediction, but I'm going to give one anyway. I reckon Cam Waters is going to be very difficult to beat next year for the championship. Him and Chaz Mostert both in Mustangs that are potentially performing on a level with the Commodores, or not Commodores anymore. But yeah, it's Kostecki's got his work cut out to keep his title. I don't think he will. But I think it's going to be a really good battle next year, and it could be. I don't want to say a classic season, but it will be a lot better of a season next year.
We talk about drivers from supercars that have won multiple titles. You look at Lowndesy, who's done domestic and international GT3s. You see Mozzie was in the Sun Energy car at Spa-Francorchamps that started at the pit lane, and then they ended up winning their class, I think it was. Or one of the other, well, it was the Sun Energy car that got wrecked in free practice, didn't make it through to qualifying. The owner of the team was actually on the blower to Mercedes saying, "We need a new car." They got a new car, got it all wrapped up and everything. It started from the pit lane and won its class after 24 hours. But you look at, like, say, Shane Van Gisbergen going over to NASCAR next year full time. Scott McLaughlin has really endeared himself to the IndyCar public. He's been a firm fan favourite out there. It does go to show that Supercars isn't just a de facto touring car championship, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I mean these are world class athletes, and you look at the ability or difference in abilities between the drivers and supercars, and from the top to the bottom, it's not a lot. Yes, you obviously do have the drivers that are better, but if I was to compare it to British touring cars, where you've got sort of your real top talent like Ash Sutton, Colin Turkington, you've then got some drivers at the rear end of the grid that you kind of go, well, you're there because you've paid for it, and good for you. You've paid for it to do something you want to do, but you're not really. They are there to compete, but they're not competitive. I think that's the difference. Um, whereas in supercars, you might have one or two like that. In British touring cars, it feels like you got more. So I think a lot of supercars drivers would do very well in America. The attitude seems very much the same to NASCAR in supercars, where rubbing is racing. And I am surprised McLaughlin went to the IndyCar route. I thought he would do very well in NASCAR. And I fully expect to see him and Van Gisbergen racing maybe alongside each other in something in the future. Earlier this year, actually, I was doing some work before joining Autosport, I did some work for Speed Cafe covering IndyCar for a couple of races, and I got to speak to McLaughlin. And I asked him, would you consider coming back to Supercars to race alongside Van Gisbergen? And this was before the NASCAR move was announced. And I said, because Scott now races in a Chevrolet IndyCar. A hiccup there. That sounded weird. But he raced in a Chevrolet IndyCar, and obviously Van Gisbergen was racing in a Chevrolet supercar. So you can begin to put the pieces back together. But where McLaughlin was he was the antichrist, really, for then Holden fans. He doesn't feel he could race in a Red Bull liveried car with Shane. So whether or not they will come back to Bathurst together at some point as a super team, that is something of great interest to me and probably to all supercar fans. But Shane Van Gisbergen, his NASCAR debut, it couldn't have gone any better. I mean, he won the race. I don't think anyone had ever done that. If it had been, it was only once it had been done where a driver wins on debut, and he's going to be brilliant over there. I wouldn't tip him for championship honours or anything in the first year, maybe 2 years, but like McLaughlin, I think is a future IndyCar champion. Van Gisbergen is a future NASCAR champion, and for supercars in Australian motorsport and New Zealand motorsport as well, I should put that one out there. Seeing these drivers going elsewhere and doing well, it's just incredible. It's going to inspire that next generation.
Well, that's all the general chit chat out of the way, because I've got some questions. But first of all, we're going to go to funny moments on social media. So, Sam, I want you to cast your mind back to November 16th, because there was a certain post you put on Twitter saying a quite literal overtake on Gran Turismo this evening, where you've got a Ampol Red Bull Racing liveried car doing the old Dukes of Hazzard over Subaru Impreza WRX. So that picture's now on the screen. Talk to us about your penchant for Gran Turismo, but explain to us how on earth you managed to capture that shot, and what were you thinking when you launched it like Knight Rider?
Well, that's a Nissan Skyline with Downforce. I still do a Retro and Racing Managers League, and my team is the Red Bull Tyrrell team. So that's actually my 1992 season driver's livery on that car. So yeah, that has, I think, 1,000 horsepower, that car. So when I approached that hill, which I knew you can jump in a 10 horsepower car anyway, I absolutely gunned it and just went, yeehaw, let's see what happens. And I did actually complete that overtake without even touching the car underneath it. Just jumped the whole thing clean and went, yep, this is pretty cool. So I went back and watched the replay, got the picture as proof, because why not? But my main thing on Gran Turismo is creating liveries on minis. I absolutely love, for some reason, doing that with retro or up-to-date F1 and supercars, and I've done NASCAR, IndyCar on there, whatever liveries I take my fancy, really.
Yeah. Right. So we do need to get through some questions.
Quick fire questions.
Well, not quick fire questions. We've still got about 20 minutes to fill anyway. But what was the first ever motorsport event that you attended? So can you tell me specifics such as when, where, what racing did you see, and who was the catalyst that brought you along for the ride?
It would have been my dad that took me. It would have been Brands Hatch. And I am unable to say which championship it would. It probably was something national. It was probably just a national meet at Brands Hatch, because we used to go once, maybe twice a year, if maybe more if we were lucky. But we would usually go to sort of club meetings. We'd do a couple of touring car things every now and again, but always at Brands Hatch because that was our local track, really, just over the Dartford crossing. So yeah, it would have been Brands Hatch. Yeah, and that just got me into racing. I mean, my first memory is actually watching. It's quite a macabre one, really. Is Ayrton Senna's tragic passing? And I remember Murray Walker coming on the news and giving the announcement. And I was fortunate enough to actually interview Murray Walker at his house, and so I was able to say to him, sort of, "This is really weird. I'm actually meeting my first memory here." So that takes it on a different turn.
Yeah, it does. It does. Have you ever been starstruck meeting a racing driver or a personality within motorsport?
No, definitely not. I am entirely professional when I'm in a paddock or anything, and I have that bit of arrogance where like I said earlier, you just got to go, I'm here to do a job, you are here to do a job. Um, the one time I have been, actually, no, I was slightly starstruck once, and that was during COVID. And it was the first press conference that we did online with Mick Schumacher. And it was only for a split second because obviously he looks a lot like his dad. And I was a big fan of his dad growing up. I had Michael Schumacher calendars and model cars and everything. So sort of when his face popped up on the screen and it would have only been a split second. It wasn't even sort of he couldn't even start talking before that moment had passed. It was just that split second of that's Michael in front of me, not Mick. So that was weird. But yeah, the only other time was an Ipswich player when I was on work experience. No one else has heard of this player, Lucas Savilli. He got a nasty injury, so he barely played for us. But I walked past him in a corridor and just went, "Oh, it's you." So yes, yeah, random Ipswich players that no one's heard of. Yes, racing drivers, not really.
And for those that don't know, well, this man is a devout Ipswich Town FC fan, and the amount of times I've seen on his Facebook profile when he's been at Portman Road on a
Tomorrow night.
Oh God! You see, you can't tear a football fan away from the local terraces. Penultimate question for you, Seb. From the top of your head that comes into your mind right now, apart from one that you've just mentioned, which was obviously Murray talking about Ayrton's passing at Imola in 1994, name for me the first 3 memories that come into your head of moments in motorsport that you will never forget.
One was at Silverstone on I've got to get the year right. Murray signed this program for me. I think it was 1996. I went to the Friday testing day at Silverstone, and Damon Hill came around. Yeah, I was on the outside of one of the corners, and he came around, and he was just waving at the crowd. But in my head, for some reason, he was waving at me. So that's one. That's just a personal one there. Another one that I was at A1GP when that had its first ever round at Brands Hatch. I was standing with my mum, dad, and my sister at Paddock Hill Bend, and the Team Lebanon car, that famous motor racing nation, came barrel rolling into the gravel right in front of us. So that was quite spectacular, and that event actually as a whole was brilliant. The third one, I'll just keep these personal. World Superbikes at Brands Hatch. Cole Fogarty's last year that he was racing, he got injured, so he wasn't racing that weekend. me and my dad, for my birthday, I'd been got full weekend tickets to Brands Hatch. We were there on the Saturday. On the Sunday, we couldn't find the tickets in the car. They weren't there. They'd gone missing. They weren't in the tent. They weren't in the car. Q1 very upset. I think 10, 11-year-old. And fortunately, at that point, you could get away with going, I've recognized this person. So the person on the gate recognized us, and they checked. So Dad, I don't know what he had. He had something that he could prove that he had bought these tickets. So we got in there, but when I was told before, if it didn't work, when I was told, oh, we can get home to watch it on the telly, you can imagine the reaction of, that's not going to work for me. Um, so yeah, they're three personal ones. I could probably go into three sort of on track
Well,
controversies or whatever, but they're three
you
personal
could do,
memories.
but we'd probably exceed our limit on this episode. But those that's actually quite a nice perspective to have as well. So Sam, this is your final question, and this is where we flip things around a little bit. And I ask Sam what his response will be, and then I give a corresponding response in my own right. So Sam
This can
Hall,
only go well.
this will go well, hopefully. Sam Hall, your final question here on this episode of Commentator's Corner is as follows. If you had no budget, no glass ceiling, unlike the cost caps in Formula One, that is a running gag. I always use it on this question. You can have a choice of a road and a race car to drive, and you can pick one circuit to drive those cars around. What would you choose? And can you, as briefly as you can, tell me why?
Ooh, do I go for a supercar or do I go for an F1 car? No, I've got to go with an F1 car. I know what it's going to be. It's going to be the Brawn GP car. That's the race car I'll go with. Because as I said earlier, massive Jensen Button fan. I think I'm only missing 1 to 43 models of his cars. So anyone who has them for sale, please hit me up. But but no, it would have to be the Brawn GP car. I think it's one of the best looking F1 cars. In chassis design wise, I think it's one of the best liveries. So was it one of each? Was it one actual road car and one motor racing car?
One race car, one road car, and
Oh,
you have to pick a circuit for each one.
Okay. So I would take the Brawn GP to Brands Hatch because it's not the I'll go Brands GP. Well, if you want specific. Because there's some gravel, there's some grass runoff, so if you bin it, you kind of that's on you. The other car I would have, the road one, would be a Ferrari F40. For as long as I can remember, that's been my favorite supercar for no reason more than it's got a whacking great spoiler on the back and it looks cool. Literally it. Anyone who's driven one has described it as a go-kart with a bigger engine. And it is just driver or man and machine. It's there's no computers really in the way. It's just you make a mistake, it's on you. And I would take that to Bathurst because I've got to get Bathurst in there somewhere. And I would feel safer in the F40, I think, than in the Brawn.
Okay. Right, so here's my response. Okay, we're going to stick with 2009 when it comes to Formula One. You're saying Brawn GP, so I can't have that one, unfortunately, folks, as much as I would love to.
Yes.
I'm going to go with a car that picked up second in the Canadian Grand Prix that year. And it was the BMW Sauber F109, piloted by someone who's just been announced as a WEC driver in a 499P Ferrari for 2024, of course, Robert Kubica. And I would take it to Canada. So the Circuit de Gilles Villeneuve. So that's my response on that one. So
Good track.
Ferrari
track.
F40. Okay. Just
You're
trying
going to
to.
go McLaren F1, aren't you?
No, I'm gonna.
Oh,
No. I'm going to go with the slightly more powerful version of the F40, and there were two of them. There was the F40 LM, but then there was also the F40 Competizione, which was a non-sponsored, more powerful version of the LM.
you want more power from a car that is notoriously hard to handle as it is.
Well, the funny thing is, it was actually a car that ended up racing in the JGTC, so the Japanese GT Championship, because the F40 was running in IMSA in 1990, but did not return for the 91 season. So I'm going to say F40 Competizione, and considering it did race in IMSA, I'm not going to go with an American track. I'm going to go with Suzuka, because obviously it harks back to the days of Senna v Prost, especially in the latter stages of their title battles. Where was Prost? When he got annoyed of being at McLaren, he went to Ferrari, and Suzuka being a place where multiple incidents happened between Senna and Prost over the years.
Did they? I don't recall these.
I wonder. But Sam, where can everyone find you on social medias, mate?
They can find me on Twitter at sh_48 racing. I think that's still it.
Yep.
And on Instagram, I believe it's at Sam Hall Sport. Or if you really want to keep up with random F1 liveries on minis, you can follow Mini F1 Guy on Instagram.
Well, Sam, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for jumping on board for this episode of Commentator's Corner. It's been a real hoot.
Thank you.
So, folks, that's it. We've got more guests lined up. So that's the end of episode 37 here on Commentator's Corner. Got some great guests lined up. There are a few more episodes to bring us to the end of the 2023 calendar year, because our last episode will be launching on the 23rd of December, the day before Christmas Eve. But don't forget, you can listen to us on Downforce Radio, the nation's motorsport station, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Spotify, or even watching it here on YouTube. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your respective schedules, ladies and gents. So if in doubt, flat out, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.